Hi, this is John Horvath with Elementary Makeover, where we're going to talk about some simple changes that you can make that will have a profound effect on your elementary yearbook. I feel like I need to preface this by saying that I understand that most elementary books are made by a teacher or a couple of teachers or maybe a group of parents, and that like me as a high school yearbook advisor, you don't have 20 or so little minions to kind of do all of your work. That you're doing all of this by yourself, and I know that you're aware of that, but I want you to know that I'm aware of it too. Making a yearbook can be a really big task, and everybody I think this year is bracing themselves for what to expect. And so what I'm hoping to do today is give you some things that I think are going to make your life a little bit easier, some things that I think are going to make your book look a little bit better, and then a couple of things that I think are going to make the kids appreciate your book a little bit more when they're old like me. My last point before we jump into the presentation, I think, is that we really need to keep in mind that we're making these books for two people. It's the kids right now, but then it's also for them in 20 or 30 years. And that's one of the things that really drives me as an advisor. I want my kids, when they're my age, to have books that really take them back, help them to remember the things that happened, to feel the things that they felt. And really, if you're making this book, you're making an amazing gift for these students. It can be an awful lot of work, but I really do think that it's worth it. And I want you to have the satisfaction of not just having to finish a book, but for giving the kids something that they really are going to treasure. So let's just jump right in. The first thing that we're going to talk about here is templates and backgrounds. Now, Balfour provides this thing called Simply Create. And Melania is going to be teaching a session on Thursday at 11 o'clock that's all about this, and I really think you need to check it out. These packages that they give you come with all sorts of different templates and backgrounds, and they're a great place to start, especially if you're not all that comfortable with making your own designs. But here's one of them. This is some of the examples of the slides that they give you, the templates, and now here are some of the backgrounds. What we're going to do here is talk about some principles of layout so that you can make kind of your own templates as you're moving through, and knowing how to adjust things so that your book has that really cohesive feel throughout all of it. What is the first thing that you notice when you see this spread? It's probably that big picture on the left of the dad and his daughter dancing. The first thing I want you to keep in mind here is that your spreads really need to have a dominant image. It grabs the attention of the viewer, and that really is a good thing. Also throughout the spread, you're going to see different pictures that have different sizes and different orientations. So you see some horizontal pictures with some variety as far as the width on the top. You see some vertical pictures. There's variety, and that variety is something that's really attractive to the reader. Below on the left, we have a little bit of a story. And then on the right, you have a little bit of a sidebar. We're going to look at how we can put these different pieces together in different ways to make spreads. As I've looked through a bunch of different elementary books, it seems like there's a bit of like an egalitarian approach to things where a lot of the pictures are kept the same size. There's an awful lot of them. They're the same shape. And the spreads tend to get a little bit boring, a little bit redundant. And what happens as a viewer is you tend to look at these spreads and just kind of flip because nothing actually grabs your attention. Now, this next spread is very much like the one before. I'm going to flip back to the other one and then back here again, right? You see these blocks of pictures at the top. And then at the bottom on the left, you see a little bit of a story. And on the right, a little bit of a sidebar. Now, the pictures at the top can be manipulated. They can, some can be a little bit bigger, some can be a little bit smaller. You have something bleeding off the right there and off the top. The dominant in this might be a little bit too small, but you can tell that these spreads are related. They go in the same book, right? And so you can make one of these little designs and you can tweak it in little different ways, and it goes through the book probably 10 times. You change the sidebar at the bottom, and you're really building a book here. You don't have to have a lot of different spread designs. You have to have a few good ones, and then you use them and tweak them a little bit as you're going through. Now this one doesn't even have a story. So again, you don't need to have one. As we're looking through to this year, I think some of the fear, at least the fear that I have, is that not knowing what to expect. And are we going to have the same type of events and the same amount of pictures? My fear here is that we're going to be having less, right? And that as we're having less, how are we going to fill the book? But what I want to encourage you is that less can really be more. That as you use less pictures on a spread, but you kind of blow them up, change the size, it's gonna make your spread look better, right? The viewer is gonna know what to look for. It's gonna be more visually appealing, but it's actually gonna help you this year. For this one, this spread is actually a little bit different. You're gonna notice that you still have your big dominant image. It's grabbing your attention, a little story below it. Again, we're gonna talk about stories later on. But here in the middle, you've got this one big photo block, and here you have two different sidebars. Now, the purpose of these sidebars is to allow you to cover a few different events. And so, the one here, it looks like it's the firemen that are visiting, looks like there's some sort of like little field day, and then reading outside. But you can take three different events, put them on the spread, and the organization really helps you to do this. What I want to talk about here or point out is the spacing. Now, when I talk about spacing with my students, I kind of talk about going to the mall, because teenagers tend to go to the mall a bunch. When you go to the mall, you can kind of tell that there's a normal spacing that people like have between each other, right? I mean, there's just the normal distance that people stand from one another. But then there's also like sometimes you see people that are kind of further apart. Now, the bigger spacing kind of shows that you've got different groups, right? Sometimes you see people that are standing really, really close, and that communicates something else, right? So in the same way with your book and design, there's three different kinds of spacing. One type of spacing is the normal spacing that you put between things. Next, you have a bigger spacing that kind of shows that items should be separated. And then you have that smaller spacing that really shows that those things should be going together. Now, what I would encourage you to do is don't worry about the three levels of spacing, but just think about two. One, you should have an orderly way of separating things on your spreads. However, if you put a little bit more room between things, it's going to free things up, allow the spread to kind of to breathe, and it gives your reader an ability to move across the spread without feeling so cramped. And that's what we have here. We've got this big rail down at the bottom, over here, and then up in here. And what that spacing is really doing is separating different elements. It's clear that that they belong, that they're distinct, they don't go together, and it really helps the viewer. Now here we have the same thing again. What I really like up here at the top, right, is that you have one photo and then just a little bit of a blurb about it. And again, if we're relying on photos from parents, which tends to be like a big thing within elementary yearbooks, sometimes you're going to have an event that you want to cover, and you're not going to have all that much to do with it. Maybe more so this year with everybody, with the threat of people being at home, or with maybe less parents that are allowed into the buildings. You might have less pictures, but just because you're going to have a sidebar doesn't mean you have to have lots of pictures. You can do it with one, you can do it with two, or with three. We really have lots and lots of flexibility. But if you look at this spread, there's not a lot of pictures on it, but it's actually kind of engaging. I know where to look. I move around the page. I have different ways that I can kind of enter onto the page and look at things. It works. Now, what I have here is one of my yearbooks. This is for my freshman year in high school, and I'm not going to open it up and embarrass you or embarrass myself or bore you. But when I looked through this book, I found pictures that had absolutely, I had no idea who they were or what was going on. And I really feel limited value in looking at this book. I can find my mug picture, my portrait. I can flip through, and sometimes I recognize some people, but I can't tell you how many photos that I looked at, and I had no idea who it was. Like I really had no clue, and so I just kept looking. A lot of elementary books that I've seen are missing names. And if there's one thing that you should do to your book to kind of take that next step and to make this book more valuable to your students, I would encourage you to add names. And so if we look through this, you see at this pictures along the bottom, they just list the names right below it, right? And at the top, they have this photo block, and then all the names right over here on to the right. It doesn't take all that much effort. If you talk to the gym teachers and talk to the librarians, they tend to be the best people for help with the names. But I would really encourage you to be looking into adding names. Here's another one. You see that just these little bars here on the right. These pictures are numbered, and they have the little numbers here with the names next to them, and then the names are below. It really makes the yearbook an awful lot more useful. And again, in May or June or whenever you guys get your book, people are going to know who, they're going to know who their friends are. But when they're when they're older and they're looking back, they might not remember who everybody is, right? Okay, so here's what we're going to do next. I have taken 3 of those templates from the Simply Create stuff, and I've just put pictures in them. So what I'd like you to do is kind of visualize what they could look like. If you're like me, these gray boxes really don't do much for you. And so it can be hard to actually, conceptualize, visualize what it is that you're actually looking at. So here it is, right? You have that same picture of the guy dancing with his daughter. It's really big. You have, all these photos to the top, a little bit of text over here. We're going to talk about stories in a little bit. And then the space for these little captions. Again, a little bit of copy that can tell you what is actually going on in the picture. And then on the bottom, more photos, a little bit more of a photo block, some space for captions as well. Here's another one. Now this design doesn't have this crazy big dominant photo. However, with the spacing that you have for this title and then this copy here, you kind of know where to look. Besides, you've seen this picture a bunch already, right? But let's look at this. You have one distinct sidebar. Again, it's just one photo with a little bit of a blurb. I think these one photo sidebars can be really useful this year. We've got 1 here, 2 this long here with just a couple of pictures, 3, so again, right, you have the space here, 3, 4, 5, and then this big one up here, and 6. So you have 6 different events that you can put onto one spread using these templates that are provided. All right, here's the last one we're going to look at. Now, this one reminds me, I think, a lot of what I'm seeing in yearbooks, in the sense of, like, sometimes you really do have a lot of pictures and you want to include everybody, and you have, maybe you have like some big party at the school and people are submitting an awful lot of pictures. You want to include a lot. The fact that you have the size on the left, that all these pictures are the same size, they can all be really related, right? But having the 3 bigger pictures there really helps you know what to look at. And I would encourage you, this is an opportunity for you to really, showcase big pictures and put the better pictures there, not necessarily trying to make everything even. It tends to make designs that are easy to skip through, and that's not really what we want. Okay, background images. When I look through elementary yearbooks, I see a lot of background images. So what we're gonna do is take a look at how to use them. I'm not a huge fan in general, but I do think there are some tips that you can do that would kind of tweak things and make things look a little bit better. So again, here are the 4 backgrounds that you see with that one Simply Create package. I picked out this picture because it's really bold. In fact, it's kind of extreme. And I think that if I can illustrate my point with a really crazy picture, then you'll see that if it works for this, it's going to work for some of the other things. We're going to look through, you got a big picture. It's completely opaque, right? I mean, it's just bam, right in your face. And I took it here and I just dialed it down a bit, right? It's at around 20% opacity. So you kind of take the transparency and you raise the transparency, dial down the opacity, and it becomes a little bit more manageable, right? Or up here, this is just like a gradient fade from the top. And this is a gradient fade from the side. Now, I'm not sure if you have the ability to do this in your program. It is a Photoshop thing. I would encourage you to talk to your rep. It really only takes a couple of seconds. And so it is an easy fix, but we're gonna look at one more here. Now this has the transparency pushed up, right? The opacity is dialed down, and it's just on a block of the page. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at these backgrounds with a spread. I just took one of the spreads that we were looking at before, and I removed all the white and then just plopped it on here. And what you can see is that background is just really, really loud. It gets so distracting, right? In some ways, I think that your eyes tend to get overwhelmed looking at the spread, not exactly sure like where to look. In fact, I just want to turn the page because it's just kind of too much, right? But if you just dial down the opacity, right, and make it a background, all of a sudden this thing doesn't look really all that bad. And again, I want to call your attention. This is a really, really bold background, probably more bold than stuff that I've seen in any of the yearbooks, right? This has a little bit of a gradient fade, right, which makes the text on the bottom left to be an awful lot more readable when it's just on the white. Or here, where we've got that just the bar on the one side, I think your little sidebar there is more manageable. I'm not really fond of how, the text, I think it needs a little work, but my point here was just to take a spread and then put it onto these backgrounds. Something like this could work. So just because you have a background doesn't mean you need to use the background on the entire spread, maybe for part of it, right? And it kind of helps you thematically. Now here's one that's a little bit more plain, a little bit more like what we've seen. But again, when it's completely opaque, you kind of just get to see too much, right? There's just too much there. It can be a little distracting. It's just, not a big fan. But if you dial down the opacity, it can look kind of pretty, all right? If you like backgrounds, I understand with an elementary book, it might be one of those things where it kind of adds a little bit of fun. I think that's probably the mindset for it, that it just gives you a little bit more of like a playful feel for the book. Dial it down a little bit and you're not going to have the competition on the page as far as the design. And here again with the bar, that actually looks really good, right? So here's something else. This next spread here, this is something else that I've seen done in a book. This was a high school book up in Kansas. And what they did was they took their little design element, which is these stars, and they used it like in a little bit on one side and then a little bit more at the bottom. Just it changes from spread to spread, right? So it kind of has this little design element that you can kind of use tastefully throughout the book. And that might be the way to go. It adds some fun, it adds some personality, some playfulness. It might make it seem a little bit more like a book for kids that appeals to them, but does it in a way that isn't so overwhelming. Another thing that I think that you can do to really step up your book is to neaten up how you use fonts. So fonts come in families, and the families have lots of different weights. Helvetica is a pretty plain font, and here it just got 5 different, well actually 6 including the top, different weights for this font, right? And what I would encourage you to do is find fonts that have lots and lots of different weights. Balfour has lots that they offer. Some of the fonts that they give, there's only a couple, maybe just like a bold and an italic, but some of them have an awful lot. The general rule as you're choosing fonts is to find one family that is a serif family. It has those little tails at the top or bottom, one that's a sans serif, and then one decorative font if you'd like. But my suggestion to you would be to scrap the serif stuff, to just pick one sans serif family that gives you an awful lot of flexibility. They tend to have a little bit more of a informal, kid-friendly type of a feel to them. The serif families tend to be a little bit more official. And to pick a decorative font if you think that really helps you with your book. Here's an example of a book, and they have one font here, right? And I think that they're only using this in 2 different weights. But the challenge here is for you to find different ways that it adds contrast, right? You have a very light font or lightweight, and then you have the bold, and they've added a little bit of color to certain things. Some of it's just bold and black. And then with the size, as far as the headline package, and everything looks really, really good. Having that consistency from spread to spread to spread is very important. The way that fonts tend to work is that if you have your font size be too big, it tends to look a little bit Dr. Seussy, right? And if you have your font too small, it tends to look a little bit, well, it's a little bit hard to read, but it tends to look a little bit more professional. In an elementary book, you can bump your font size up. I would be sticking in like that 12 to 14 max, right? But But if you're consistent from spread to spread, you always do names a certain way, right? You always do your body copy a certain way. Don't be afraid of a little bit of white space. If you're not filling everything up, it's probably going to look okay, right? But being consistent with your fonts is a way that you can make your book really, really, I mean, it's going to look better, but it's also going to, I think, simplify things for you because you're just always doing things the same way. Now, I've been hinting for a couple of times about this whole idea of how we can add copy. And again, I want to remind you, I get that you don't have 20 kids that are writing all these different stories for you. But what I want to kind of bring back is there's so much that happens in a school year that is not just kind of caught up in those pictures. I do lunch duty on Fridays. And every once in a while, parents come in and they have lunch with their kids, or they break out their cameras. And the funniest thing happens. Anytime a mom lifts up a camera, the kids clump, turn, smile, pose for the picture, and then they go back to their stuff. And it happens everywhere, right? It's at lunch, it's like at a football game. I think kids are conditioned to just stopping and posing for the camera. But there's so much that that happens in school that kind of is between all of those posed pictures. And if you're relying on parent pictures, you're probably going to have a lot of them, right? But there's so much in the stories. I think back of kids talking about going to the Alamo and there was this rainstorm and parents just stopped at Walmart on the way back, went in and bought towels and dry t-shirts for everybody. But unless that's in the yearbook, nobody remembers it. Right? I mean, there's so many stories that happen that if you don't cover them, if we don't mention them, they're forgotten unless they happen to, they be brought up by some type of random memory. Whereas as opposed to having a book where like it's there to jog your memory and to help you to remember those really cool things. But copy doesn't have to be these big, long stories, right? So what I want to do here is just point out a few different ways that you can do copy that I think are a little bit easier on you and that look really good and get more people into the book and make moms happy, right? So one of these things here has just 3 different questions and then a bunch of different quotes. And you can ask kids like, what would you think about this? Or what was your favorite memory about that? And then kids write little quotes, you put them in, pretty simple, right? Or this one, it's just 5 different quotes, right? So it doesn't even have to be, the 3 questions. There's lots of ways to do this. You can have the pictures, you can not have the pictures. Now this is the one that I really want to focus on for a second, because if you look at this, it's 2 sentences and then a quote. And that's their story. And they have 2 of them, but you don't have to have 2 of them. 2 sentences, just facts saying what exactly happened. This one on the left says, before heading to Dallas to compete in the UIL spirit competition, the varsity cheer team practiced for weeks leading up to the January 17th competition. They prepped a band dance, fight song and cheer, and performed at a show off for parents and supporters on January 14th. Competing in the co-ed division, they earned 4th place. And then there's a quote. That's easy to write, and it actually reminds you of what's going on. Again, I look and I see pictures in this thing and I have no idea what the heck was going on in that photo. I don't know. I'm just like, oh, they look funny, right? So you have the ability to include some of these little stories and help people to remember memories and to put these pictures into some sort of context. So now I want to look back here just quickly. This is just another spread that we saw before. And you see this copy on the left? It's really small, like there's not a lot. You can put two sentences and a quote. It fits and it is easy to do. Or back to this one, right? You've got this copy here and it's 4 different quotes. So you can see this type of thing is not that difficult to put in. This is also, by the way, copy and putting quotes in the book can be really useful because if you have some kids that you just really haven't gotten a lot of pictures of, you can have them get quoted. You put them in the book and you're golden. All right, so let's review these different things, right? Things that we went over. Number 1, less can be more. Putting all of the pictures that you get onto the spread doesn't necessarily make it better. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse. I would encourage you to use templates that Balfour provides for you, whether it's in the Simply Create or in some other way, or whether you can kind of just take a basic template and then that is customizable, that you can kind of make this with a picture that's this wide, now it's this high, and change things around so that everything kind of looks related. To organize in modules. And so as far as your different events, you put them in different spots onto the spread. You use good spacing in between, right? That spacing is really important. It's going to help you to, it's going to help the reader to not feel a little bit overwhelmed with just too much on the spread. And it helps them to kind of move their eye around and kind of tell where things go. Go easy on the backgrounds. They're there and they might be useful, but more backgrounds does not mean mo better, right? So ease up, change the opacity a little bit, maybe put it at the side, a little bit just at the bottom. But your goal is not to put as many backgrounds into a yearbook as possible. Kind of stick with a few that tend to go together, and then use them strategically and sparingly. Names, you got to include their names. And again, I know that a yearbook can be an awful lot of work, but in that sense of what, like, offering something and giving something to these kids that is really going to be something that they still hold on to when they're in their 40s, right? That the names are something that they're going to want later on. And it does take a little bit of time to figure out who they are, but it's something that I totally encourage you to include. And then finally, the stories that you include, that's really your gift. And again, this is just somebody in his 40s that looks back at school and sees there's so many things that happen that I don't remember. But I have other yearbooks where I look through and I've read a couple of stories and I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally remember that. That was awesome. What you do as an advisor is a gift to your kids, and I encourage you to include stories. It can be a big part of it. Well, that's it. Thanks so much for your time, for stopping in, and for listening about Elementary Makeover. What we're going to do now is hop into the Q&A, and I'm happy to sit around and talk with you, answer any of your questions. Thanks.